It's
Okay.
being recorded, Ted.
All set. Okay, thank you. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and jump in. So if you all remember about, I guess it was a year ago now, did a clinic on plywood-sheathed freight cars, including scratch building sides for a PFE -9 car that used plywood sheathing. So that is going to be the topic here. I have a few thank yous at the front here, people who helped to share information and resources to put this together, as well as the to help with the actual modeling. I have a list of parts here. If this is not entirely expansive, I'll update it before I publish this to my blog, but it's a bunch of stuff in here, nothing too difficult to find. One note on the red caboose body that you use with the plywood sides, you want the taller one. Red Caboose released some -9 rebuilds early on in the life cycle of those cars, and they were actually short in terms of height. So just make sure you end up with the taller car. The other thing I would mention, and Ryan will probably be able to update something about this in the chat. The sides for these will be available as a part set too. He and I are going to coordinate to get the instructions and everything done. And then the rest of the parts in here, I think, are fairly are available. The one thing I might note, scale hardware brass nut with stud, which where my cursor is right now. There's a company that just, I think, took over the scale hardware line. I'll try to call that out in my blog posting, because I know someone else mentioned them recently, and I also purchased some stuff from them myself. So I'll call that out too. So here's the prototype that I used to develop the actual car. And just for a little historical context, again, PFE was rebuilding the last of their rebuilds from the -12s, 13s, and some of the 14s that were built in the 20s. And at that time, the last group were the -24s, and those were being rebuilt with plywood sheathing for the sides. And they also had improved dreadnought ends and rectangular or diagonal panel roofs. And at that same time, cars in the -9 category that were coming up to be kind of rebuilt or refurbished in the late 40s, some of them got plywood sheathing, as you see here. It had 6 plywood panels on each side of the door. And I don't know that a number has been established as to how many cars we're talking about, but there were enough of them that they were photographed, and you can see them in images. So it obviously was something that occurred with enough regularity that there were photographs of them, and they are out there to be seen. So this is where we left off with the model. I had put the sides and the basic body together with the red caboose body. Here's the roof. You can see there, I put the ladders on, I'd done the brake gear. And one note that I had was, if this was something that you were so inclined to build, you could do it with the red caboose O-scale model as well. You would obviously have to do something to create the sides yourself, but the rest of the parts are there. Here's a quick refresh on the scratch built side. This presentation is available, and I'll refer to it on my blog, so we don't have to delve too deeply into the details of this, but this is what it looked like. And here was how the body was put together, just to refresh on that, with the red caboose body with the resin sides. And the floor had to be narrowed a bit for everything to work. So now jumping into kind of new material for this specific clinic. One thing that is worth noting about the -9 rebuilds is the ladders that were used on these cars. They, on most of them, not all of them, but most of them, the ladders that were on the sides were a wine type ladder, which, if you're not familiar with it, it's essentially an angle with holes in the faces like you see here, but also on the sides, and you can see some telltale light hitting where the grabs were actually, the rungs were actually bent 90 degrees to go through the face of the stile and 90 degrees again to come out the side of the stile. They were assembled on the car side that way, and once they were in place and once the stiles were secured, it was a very rigid method to create a ladder. It's probably just a little finicky to put it together. One interesting thing was that on most of the -9 rebuilds, the ladders on the ends use the typical riveted rung that you see on 90+% of the ladders that we see in this era. But the sides used these wine style ladders, which are very easily modeled with etched stiles with grabs just essentially bent to fit into those holes, similar to what Yarmouth Model Works offered and I offered in some of my kit conversions back in the day. The thing that I paid particular attention to with these ladders is these brackets that were used to attach them to the sides and to the ends. You had these look like they were castings actually at the top, and you notice the one on the left has 4 90-degree bends and encloses the entire surface of the stile, as well as attaches at both sides of that stile on the car side. This one on the right attaches only on the inside of the stile. And then at the bottom, you had an attachment on the side of the stile there. And it actually, interestingly, that rung at the bottom passed through the bracket. I didn't model it that way, but that's something to note. And then on the right here, there's actually a triangular webs on the top and bottom of that angle bracket there. So these are details worth noting. And then one thing I also want to point out is the left-hand attachment point for the uncoupling device was actually also attached to the bottom of the ladder stile there. So that's kind of interesting. And then you just had a strap that went around both sides of the stiles here. One thing I want to note at this moment, just that's a detail that's different on the prototype shown here from what's in the model. This particular car was equipped with, it had Equipco hatch covers, and that type of hatch cover, the corner grabs on the roof were actually attached using straps that used carriage bolts on the face of the roof fascia here and here. And then there was also, because it was a 90-degree bend, there was actually one attached to the surface of the roof. This is different from what you'll see on the model. And, a couple other details to point out. The cast bolster ends, these had towing loops, holes in them, and the drip spout kind of pans here as well. A lot of detail there, but it's all worth noting and trying to replicate. Here's a shot of another -9 rebuild. I put this one in here for a couple of reasons. It shows a strap that was attached at the lower part of the end. A lot of -9 rebuilds had this type of strap. Some of them had a strap down here that ran almost the full width of the end, as well as a narrower one here. This particular car didn't have it. And sometimes the strap at the bottom was an angle as opposed to just a flat strap. So that's something worth seeing. I also wanted to show this because the inside stile on the end ladders actually had a bend in it, and then the bottom of it attached directly to the end sill. You can see ladder brackets at the top here. This particular car was an earlier -9 rebuild. It still had the wood platforms around the hatch covers, and this particular car had wood hatch covers, as seen here. One other unusual thing, this was a car that had the riveted rungs on both ladders. Very unusual in all the photos I've seen of -9 rebuilds to see this, but it is worth pointing out here. Also wanted to show you what the grab attachments looked like for wood hatch covers where the grabs were actually attached to the face of the hatch opening, as you can see here. You can also see the ladder brackets at the top here. And one other thing I wanted to point out, these hatch cover rests, when the hatch flipped open, this angle here that I'm pointing to in the next photo will show it also, would hit right here and would rest on that. This was actually wood, and then there was a strap, and these varied too. You have to look at photos for differences. This one only had a one attachment point here. The one you see here actually has it's a little bit longer, and it went under the wood that ran across. This is that triangular piece that I was talking about that would rest right on top here, and this was metal sheathed. Last thing, again, I was talking about how this grab attached directly to the outer face of the hatch opening there. That's a detail worth replicating as well on this style of car. So getting into some of the details, picking up where we left off with the last model. So the way that I replicated these rests for the hatch covers when they're fully open, I used 30 by 30 styrene strips running all the way from the roof eaves to the center of the car, which would be underneath the running boards. One thing I didn't do that would be more prototypical, the strap that overlapped the roof eaves actually ran under these. I did not try to replicate it in that way. There's a 10 by 30 strip here that's about 10 inches long. So from here to here, it would be about 10 inches long. And then these 5,000 pieces of styrene, it's 8 scale inches from here to here. So it's a little bit narrower than the 10-inch piece below it. And I glued them in place here, and then you'll see how I ended up pushing them down like you see here. And that showed where like this kink would develop. And then once I had that kink, I could go ahead and just trim and remove the excess material. And I had that like that metal piece that was there that the hatch cover rested on. One thing about this photo, it also shows you on the running board here, the dimples that I put in to represent where the carriage bolts for the running boards were. But this is a way to replicate those hatch cover rests for cars that didn't have wood platforms. Here's a slightly different shot of that. Here you can see this is before I trimmed that excess material here. Here are the pieces that I mentioned. On the prototype, they would actually have a 90-degree angle and they would go under this wood strip here. I elected to not do that. And this is before they were trimmed. Mine, you'll see a later photo where it's trimmed here and also trimmed along here. But I simulated those with 5,000 styrene, 30 thousandths wide. Here's how I did that grab iron at the corner. These are pieces of brass, sheet brass that I made into strips, and there's a 90-degree bend. You can see here where this actually rests up against the face of the hatch opening there, and it also rests against the hatch frame there too. And then I just drilled holes in them, glued them in place. This corner grab I modeled based upon what I saw in the photo that I showed previously. And once I sandblast these, I will add attachment detail, like rivet, nut bolt, washer type things. This is 10 thousandths wire, and then that little corner bolt is 8 thousandths. The way I created the running boards, I added 3 strips of 10 thousandths by 60 thousandths strips. I added the first one in the center, and what I did was I went and glued it to the roof saddles, and I eyeballed to make sure it was in the center of those saddles. And then I used 15 thousandth spacers and put those spacers so that I could make sure that the distance from the center strip to the next strip was consistent all the way down. And that got my 3 strips in place. Notice that they're longer at the ends. There's some excess, which I will trim. And then I went ahead and went back, and on top of those strips, I added 15 thousandths by 60 thousandths, and I had textured those with sandpaper beforehand. So they were a little bit rough, kind of a little grainy. And you'll notice breaks in the strips here. These are actually independent strips. So I glued a strip here and terminated it there, and then started another one. These are really long, but in a couple roof photos I looked at, I couldn't see any breaks except for these. So those were the only places I put breaks on them. You can also see where I put little depressions using a bulletin board pin to represent where the carriage bolts are located. And then once I was done, I added a 1x2 strip flat against the bottom of the running boards, and it's 18 inches from here to here, which is actually a little bit long by prototype standards, but because our models don't couple as closely as the prototype, it ends up looking good compared to like an adjacent model. And then what you see here, this is a 1x3 strip on edge up against that 1x2, so it's like a 3x3 angle. And then these strips here are 10x30, and then these little bits here are 5 thousandths by 30 that replicate the straps that support the end of the running board. Little bit about the sill steps. These are Yarmouth model work sill steps. And one note just to kind of point out, I found that the location of these sill steps wasn't always consistent. This one's actually a little offset from center. Sometimes they're in the center, so that's something you could be looking out for. Once they were in place, I added these 5 thousandths strips that are 30 thousandths wide. I kind of blended them in using MEK, and then put a little bit of ACC behind them where they met the wire, and then just used a file to kind of blend them in so they look a little bit like twisted sill steps as on the prototype. The defect card holder, you can see it on the prototype here. This is what it looks like on the model. One thing I didn't do, there's actually the defect card holder, the lid like angles this way. I didn't replicate that, but the way that I created it was I added a piece of 2/1000 sheet brass to the side of the car. And then on top of the kind of the bottom edge of that, I added a 15,000 styrene rod. And then I took 1.5 sheet brass, and this photo, both of these photos here show it at the same point in time. I secured it to the brass, and then once that had dried, I kind of pushed it over and cut it, and then created the little door like you see here. This is only on one side of the car. The defect card holders on prototypes were only in one location. So just be aware of that when you're adding it. It's not on both sides of the car. This shows you the ending on the detailing on the end of the car. I used the kit's brake step and supports. The supports have a lot of material in between these diagonals and everything. I trimmed everything away so that all I had was just kind of these triangular shapes, which you'll see in another photo from the side. You can see ladder brackets here. I'll cover those in a little bit more detail in a moment. Here's the end of the running board and those supports. This handbrake is the new Tangent Scale Models minor handbrake, which is quite nice. I used a KD hand wheel, but I removed the KD mounting lug and drilled a hole in the center and secured it with a Scale hardware brass. It's basically a square nut with a post. This is a precision scale retainer valve, and I'll show you a better photo of that in a moment. The angle cock air hose bracket is from High Tech Details. It's not as, it doesn't 100% replicate the prototype, but it's durable. And so it was easy to attach. Here's the angle that I created to replicate that support that was added to a lot of Dash 9s. This particular one is a full angle. From what I could see on the prototype photo, this car had that full angle. Here's a different shot showing a lot of the same things. Again, here's that precision scale retainer, 8 thousandths wire. This is 15 thousandths wire. These grabs were bent by hand. These are both just etched ladder styles with holes in them. If I were doing this again, I do have rungs, so I could make it look like riveted rungs on the end and the kind of wine style on the sides. And then this angle at the bottom of the ladder is an add-on for the uncoupling device that was made from scratch. Here's how I created the ladders, and all of these brackets you see here, like these at the top, this one here with 5,000 styrene webs, the one for the uncoupling device, the ones for the end, those were all created from 2000s brass and then bent and cut to shape. It's tedious. I am working on some tools and jigs and things to make this a lot easier the next time I do it. But for this particular model, it was a bit of a prototype, and I was just trying to make things look right and match the prototype. So all of that said, this is where the model sits today. And part of the reason is I do all of my sandblasting with a little cabinet outdoors. And frankly, every weekend, it's just been too darn cold to get outside and do that. So I should be blasting, possibly even tomorrow if it doesn't rain here. It's supposed to be close to 70 in Brooklyn. So I'm going to try to do that and then get this painted and finished. I generally, all of the rivets and things and bolt heads that would go on metal, I add those after I do the blasting. If you do it beforehand, some of them tend to get blasted off and then you have to go back and add them. So I just save that for the end. Obviously, I'll have to paint this, I'll prime it, and then the sides will be daylight orange, roof and ends will be the SP freight car red, and then underframe will be black. And then the weathering. In terms of that finishing, I'll post that on my blog over the course of the next month or so. It won't be a full-blown clinic because really just the finishing at this point is fairly simple in terms of following similar techniques to what I do most of the time. And so there's really not a need to do another clinic on it, but I should have this done and updated on the blog over the course of the next month. And, you know, if you have any questions at that point, you can raise them there. Or if you have questions now, obviously you can ask those in the chat. But I'm excited about this. It's nice to have a model that I don't think anyone else has. And even after those of you who got the parts when this clinic was initially done, you know, I'm sure many of you haven't gotten this far in building yours as well. So it'll be a nice little treat for us to have something that a lot of people don't have. And a couple references in here. One is the Pacific Fruit Express book that I'm sure many of you already have in your libraries. There's some good photos in there to aid in detailing. And then the Southern Pacific Freight Car Painting and Lettering Guide that was also Tony Thompson was involved in that. Dick Harley did a tremendous amount of work on the PFE section of that book. It's a great resource as well. So I highly recommend that book too. And then again, this will be posted at my blog, and I'll also post the link to the YouTube file as well. I think this was a record for me in terms of a quick clinic. So thank you. And if there are any questions, I will be happy to field them now.
I don't see any questions, Ted.
Okay.
I will give a quick update on the additional kits. The sides are all cast, decals are here. I've been waiting for hatch support etchings for months now, and we've basically given up on that supplier and now are commissioning someone else to make them. So hopefully we'll get them in about a few more weeks. I'm also including the extra cross tire cross bearer that you need that doesn't come in the red caboose kit. So the Pierre was nice enough to cast a whole bunch of those up for us. So hopefully they'll be up for sale maybe in about a month or so.
Excellent. All right.
Guess that's
Well,
about it then, eh?
yeah. We can stop recording, whoever's